The beach was supposed to be a peaceful escape, a place to unwind and feel the sun on our skin. But today, it turned into a nightmare. I was pushing my daughter's wheelchair along the shore, the sound of the waves calming her as she smiled, the warmth of the day wrapping around us. It was supposed to be a perfect afternoon, but in an instant, everything changed. A loud gunshot split the air, freezing me in place. I turned in horror, my heart racing, only to see my daughter, once smiling and full of life, crumple to the sand, blood spilling from her chest. The world seemed to stop, the sound of my screams drowned out by the chaos that erupted around us. People were running in all directions, panic filling the air as my daughter's life hung by a thread. I rushed to her side, my hands shaking as I tried to stop the bleeding, but all I could hear was the sound of her shallow breaths. Through the chaos, I saw her, the woman responsible. She stood there, her hand still gripping the gun, her expression cold, as if she had done nothing wrong. Her words echoed in my mind, "Your daughter's wheelchair is ruining the view." It didn't make sense. How could anyone do this? How could someone shoot an innocent woman in a wheelchair, a defenseless soul just trying to enjoy the day? The question haunted me. This wasn't a random act. This was calculated. This Karen, with her hate-filled eyes, had a vendetta. And today, she would pay for what she had done. It was supposed to be a peaceful day at the beach, a break from the chaos of everyday life. My daughter and I had been looking forward to this moment all week. The salty air, the gentle sound of waves crashing against the shore, it was the perfect escape. But from the moment we arrived, I could feel something wasn't right. As we wheeled my daughter's chair onto the sand, people gave us strange looks, some murmuring under their breath. I brushed it off, thinking they were just staring at the wheelchair, unsure of how to react. But then she appeared. The HOA Karen. She walked towards us, her heels digging into the sand with each step, her eyes narrowing as she approached. She was well-dressed, exuding a sense of entitlement that made me uneasy from the start. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Your daughter's chair is ruining the view for everyone else. You need to leave." My heart skipped a beat. I was stunned, unsure if I had heard her correctly. "Excuse me?" I managed, my voice trembling. "What did you just say?" She didn't back down. "You heard me," she snapped. "That wheelchair is blocking the view of the beach. You need to move." My daughter, who had been so excited to be there, was now visibly uncomfortable, her face flushed with embarrassment. I could see the anger in her eyes. She didn't understand what she had done wrong. I tried to reason with the woman, explaining that my daughter had every right to be there, just like everyone else. But it was clear this wasn't about the chair, it was about control, about power. "This beach is for people who actually appreciate the view," she sneered, glancing around at the other beachgoers, some of whom were now quietly nodding in agreement with her. "Not for people who think they can just take up space and ruin it for others." The word stung. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was this really happening? Was this woman really telling us to leave, not because of anything my daughter had done, but because of her disability? My hands tightened on the wheelchair handles as I tried to stay calm. I wasn't going to let this woman bully us off the beach, not without a fight. But she wasn't done. "I'm calling the HOA, she said, pulling out her phone with a smug smile. "They'll take care of this. You'll be sorry you ever came here." The threat in her voice was unmistakable. My stomach churned with dread. This wasn't just some random woman, she was part of the HOA, the group that ran the community, and I knew all too well how much power they held. I could feel the weight of their judgment bearing down on me. This wasn't just an unpleasant encounter. This was the beginning of something much worse. As the Karen stood there, phone in hand, I knew this wasn't going to end quietly. The look in her eyes told me that no amount of reasoning would change her mind. The situation was escalating rapidly, and with every passing second, I felt my stomach tighten in dread. My daughter, still sitting in her wheelchair, was trying to stay calm, but I could see the fear creeping into her eyes. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a battle for our right to exist in this space. She dialed the number with a sense of purpose, her fingers stabbing the buttons like she was sending out a signal to rally reinforcements. My heart sank. I could already tell that this wasn't just an argument about a wheelchair, this was something much deeper, this was about power, privilege, and exclusion. As she spoke into the phone, I heard her voice getting louder, more venomous. Yes, we have a situation here. There's a disabled person on the beach, and their wheelchair is ruining the view, she said with a sneer. You need to send someone over immediately to deal with this. I tried to stay calm, my voice trembling slightly as I responded, Ma'am, we're not causing any harm. We're just here to enjoy the beach, like everyone else. But she cut me off, her tone turning cold and dismissive. No, you're not. This is my beach, and you need to leave. Her words were like a slap in the face. The beach, her beach? It felt as if she believed she had the power to decide who deserved to be there and who didn't. My mind raced as I realized that this wasn't a one-off encounter, this was a deliberate attempt to remove us from the public space, to push us out simply because my daughter was in a wheelchair. The atmosphere was thick with tension now, and other beachgoers were starting to notice. Some looked away quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding, while others whispered to each other, casting glances in our direction. I could feel the heat of their judgment, and it stung. It was as if the weight of the situation was shifting, and it no longer felt like just me and my daughter versus one Karen, it felt like the whole beach was taking sides. A few moments later, two more figures appeared, walking toward us with an air of authority. It was clear they were from the HOA, just as the Karen had promised. The man, tall and broad-shouldered, spoke first. What's going on here? He asked, his eyes scanning us coldly. The Karen wasted no time, stepping forward with her finger pointing at me. This woman and her daughter are refusing to leave. Her wheelchair is ruining the view for everyone else. The man didn't even glance at my daughter. His eyes locked onto me, as if I was the problem. You heard her, he said, his voice low and dismissive. You need to move. This isn't the place for people like you. My heart dropped. The words felt like a dagger. People like me? What was that supposed to mean? Was it because of my daughter's disability? Was it because of the wheelchair? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This is a public beach, I said firmly. We have every right to be here, just like anyone else. But my words fell on deaf ears. The Karen was relentless, her face twisted in anger as she spoke again, I've had enough of this. You don't belong here, and neither does your daughter. I could see her enjoying this. She wasn't just trying to kick us out, she was enjoying the power, the control, the satisfaction of putting us in our place. My blood began to boil, and I could feel my hands shaking, but I couldn't let her see my anger. I had to keep my composure for my daughter. But it wasn't just the Karen now, it was the entire HOA, the two new people she had summoned to join her in this crusade to rid the beach of anyone they deemed undesirable. I could see them circling around us, creating a wall of judgment, and I realized there was no way I was going to win this fight by reasoning with them. No amount of pleading or explaining would change their minds. We weren't just intruding on their beach, we were intruding on their perfect, pristine world where people like us didn't belong. The beach is mine, and I'm going to make sure it stays that way, the Karen spat out as she turned away. Leave now, or we'll have the authorities remove you. As the two men stood there, staring at me, I realized that this wasn't just about a beach chair, it was about something far darker. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This was a calculated move to push us out, to humiliate us, to make us feel like we didn't belong. And that's when it hit me, this wasn't about the view. This was about power, control, and hate. The tension in the air was suffocating, thick with the weight of judgment and power that the Karen and her HOA allies had imposed on us. My daughter, her face pale with confusion and hurt, sat silently in her wheelchair, her hands tightly gripping the armrests as if she could hold on to something stable in this whirlwind of cruelty. I stood beside her, fighting to keep my voice steady, to hold on to whatever small piece of dignity we still had left. The two men from the HOA, standing like silent sentinels, hadn't spoken a word since the Karen's outburst. Their eyes were cold, scanning me, then shifting to my daughter, then back to me. It was clear they had no intention of helping us. They were here to enforce this woman's petty, destructive power. I felt the anger building inside me like a storm, my heart pounding in my chest as I clenched my fists. I wasn't going to leave. I wasn't going to let this woman push us out, to rob us of the little peace we had. But then, something happened. Something that took everything from me in an instant. The Karen, still standing several feet away, her phone still clutched in her hand, smiled. It was a cold, malicious smile, one that sent a chill running through my body. She took a step back, then pulled something from the side of her purse. At first, I thought it was just her phone, maybe something she'd meant to use as a weapon of words. But then, my breath caught in my throat as I saw it, a gun. It felt like everything around me stopped moving. The sound of the waves crashing on the shore, the distant chatter of other beachgoers, the rustling of the wind, it all vanished. My eyes were locked on that gun in her hand, her fingers tightening around it as if she was preparing to do something irrevocable. I couldn't believe it. How had things escalated this far? How had we gone from a simple disagreement over a wheelchair to this? "Get off my beach," she said coldly, her voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "Or I'll make you leave." I could feel my body shaking, a mixture of fear and rage coursing through me. "Don't do this," I pleaded, my voice trembling, but there was no humanity in her eyes. Her lips twisted into a sneer as she raised the gun, pointing it directly at my daughter. My body moved on instinct. "No!" I screamed, but it was too late. In one swift motion, she pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot shattered the silence, a deafening crack that seemed to freeze time itself. Everything went white for a split second, then the world came crashing back in a blur of chaos. My daughter's scream ripped through the air, the most gut-wrenching, soul-wrenching sound I had ever heard. My legs gave out, and I collapsed beside her as she fell from her wheelchair, blood pouring from the wound in her chest. I could barely comprehend what was happening. I was numb, my mind struggling to process the horror that had just unfolded before my eyes. The world felt like it was slipping through my fingers, like I was watching my daughter die before my eyes. But in the midst of that horror, there was a flicker of hope. I could still feel her weak pulse, still hear her shallow breaths. It wasn't over. It couldn't be. But I knew this, nothing would ever be the same again. This was no longer just a fight for a place on the beach. This was a fight for my daughter's life. And I would do anything, absolutely anything, to make sure that she didn't die here, today, at the hands of this monster. In that moment, I vowed to make her pay. To make her feel every ounce of the pain she had caused. This woman had no idea what she had just started. And neither did I. As my daughter was rushed to the hospital, I was left reeling with the horrifying truth of what had just transpired. The police had arrived, taking statements from witnesses, but the entire scene felt like a blur. The beach, once a peaceful sanctuary, had turned into a battleground. It wasn't until later that I learned the full extent of what I had unknowingly stepped into. While the police were conducting their investigation, a local woman, who had been walking along the beach when the incident occurred, approached me. Her face was grave, and she hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I know who that woman is," she said quietly. "She's not just some HOA member. She's been involved in something much darker." The woman, whose name was Carol, explained that the Karen, whose name was Rebecca, had a history of targeting people she deemed undesirable, particularly those with disabilities. "You see," Carol continued, her voice lowering as though she was afraid to speak further, Rebecca's husband runs a company that profits from exclusive properties. She's part of an underground group that seeks to make public spaces less accessible for people with disabilities. My heart sank as she spoke. It wasn't just about a view. It wasn't even about the beach. It was about control, about an agenda to create a world where people like my daughter, people with disabilities, were excluded and silenced. Carol explained that Rebecca had once been caught vandalizing a wheelchair-accessible park bench in their neighborhood, spray-painting hateful messages targeting disabled people. She had even been reported multiple times for making discriminatory comments at HOA meetings, advocating for cleaner, more exclusive spaces that didn't have eyesores like people in wheelchairs. Her outburst today wasn't about the view, Carol said, shaking her head in disbelief. It was about her deep-rooted hate for people like your daughter. She was trying to enforce her belief that people like your daughter don't belong in public spaces, anywhere. That's what she's always done. It all clicked. The hostility in Rebecca's voice, the coldness in her eyes, it wasn't just a knee-jerk reaction to a disabled person on her beach. It was the culmination of years of hate, of intolerance that had festered beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to manifest. And it had manifested in the most violent, unforgivable way possible. Rebecca wasn't just an angry woman who didn't like people in wheelchairs. She was part of a movement, a dark undercurrent in the community, that sought to erase people like my daughter from society. That was the truth I had been blind to, the truth that Rebecca wasn't just a Karen out for petty revenge, but a part of something much more insidious and dangerous. And now, it was my mission to ensure that this truth was exposed for the world to see, to show everyone that her actions were not just the result of one twisted individual, but part of a larger, more systemic issue that needed to be eradicated once and for all. The days following the attack were a whirlwind of emotions. My daughter had survived, but her recovery was going to be long and painful. As I sat in the hospital, trying to process what had happened, I realized I couldn't just sit back and let Rebecca get away with it. There were too many unanswered questions, and too much at stake. I had to make sure she was held accountable, not just for the shooting, but for everything she represented, the hate, the intolerance, the systemic discrimination against people like my daughter. And I wasn't going to let it slide. I enlisted the help of a private investigator, someone who had experience digging into the backgrounds of people like Rebecca. I needed to know everything about her, her past, her connections, and most importantly, her involvement with the HOA. As we began our investigation, we uncovered a troubling web of connections that linked Rebecca to several shady individuals in the community. The first thing we discovered was that Rebecca had a long history of aggressive behavior toward people with disabilities. The police reports painted a chilling picture. She had been reported multiple times for making discriminatory comments about people in wheelchairs, and even though the complaints were dismissed by the HOA, it was clear that her attitude toward disabled individuals had been hostile for years. But it wasn't just about words. There were other instances of her harassment, like the vandalism of the accessible park bench in her neighborhood, which Carol had mentioned. It wasn't just a random act of cruelty, it was part of a larger, deeply ingrained belief system. We also found something disturbing in the HOA's records. Rebecca had been an active member of the committee for years, and it seemed that she had quietly pushed for policies that made public spaces less accessible to disabled people. At HOA meetings, she had argued that spaces should be more pristine and exclusive, calling for the removal of ramps, benches, and other accessible features. She had even gone so far as to propose building a members-only beach club, where only certain people would be allowed access, effectively shutting out anyone with a disability. The HOA's complicity in her actions became clear as we dug deeper. In an effort to gather more information, we started interviewing the beachgoers who had witnessed the shooting. One woman, a mother who had been there with her children, approached us with a chilling account. She described how Rebecca had been watching us from a distance, pacing back and forth as we enjoyed the beach. She had seen Rebecca take out her phone and dial a number, speaking in a low voice to someone on the other end. The woman said that Rebecca had been angrier than usual that day, her usual passive-aggressive demeanor replaced by something more malicious. "She was fixated on your daughter," the woman told us. "I could see it in her eyes. She was determined to make you leave, no matter what it took." That was when it hit me. The incident wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was calculated. Rebecca had been planning this for a while, carefully orchestrating her attack. The gun, the words, the escalation, it had all been part of a sickening plan. But what disturbed me even more was the information we uncovered about the HOA's role in all of this. We spoke with other residents who had quietly witnessed Rebecca's actions and had feared speaking out for years. Many told us that the HOA, under Rebecca's influence, had created a culture of exclusion. It wasn't just her, there were others in the HOA who shared her beliefs, who saw disabled individuals as a nuisance, a distraction from their vision of a perfect community. This wasn't just one woman's hate, this was a systemic problem that went beyond Rebecca. One witness, an older man who had lived in the community for over 30 years, explained how Rebecca had once tried to rally the HOA members against a disabled resident who had requested an accessible parking spot near the community center. "She made it sound like a tragedy," he said, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Like it would ruin the whole aesthetic of the place. I've never heard anyone speak so cruelly about a person who just wanted to be able to park and get inside like everyone else." This wasn't just about a beach view. This was personal. Rebecca had spent years cultivating an environment where she could impose her narrow, exclusionary views on the entire community. It was no longer just a fight to get justice for my daughter, it was a fight against a system that had allowed people like Rebecca to act with impunity, to use their positions of power to enforce their prejudices. As the investigation continued, it became clear that Rebecca had underestimated the strength of the people she had tried to oppress. We weren't just going to let her walk away from this. The more we uncovered, the more determined I became to expose her, to make sure the truth was known. And soon, the entire community would have to face the reality of what Rebecca and the HOA were truly capable of. The investigation had been long, painful, and grueling, but it was all coming to a head. I had gathered enough evidence to take down Rebecca, and I wasn't about to let her walk away from what she'd done. The truth had come to light. Her actions weren't just a one-time outburst, they were part of something much larger, a deeply rooted belief that disabled people like my daughter didn't belong in public spaces, a belief that she had nurtured for years. Now, it was time for justice. The day of the final confrontation arrived, and I could feel the weight of everything that had been building up. The police had scheduled a meeting with Rebecca, and we were finally going to present the case against her. We had everything we needed: witness testimony, her own words on her phone, the security footage from the beach, and the record of her long history of discrimination. It was all lined up, irrefutable, and it was time to bring it all into the open. The meeting was set to take place at the local courthouse, a small, but significant room where Rebecca would have to face the consequences of her actions. I walked in with my lawyer, holding my head high. My daughter, though still recovering, stood by my side, her strength surprising me every day. I wasn't doing this just for me anymore. I was doing it for her, for every person like her who had ever been targeted because of their disability. Rebecca was already there when we arrived, sitting across from her lawyer, a smug expression plastered across her face. She hadn't changed. Even after everything, she still carried herself with that same sense of superiority, that belief that she was untouchable. She hadn't expected us to fight back like this. She hadn't expected us to gather evidence, to expose her, to hold her accountable for what she'd done. But that's exactly what we were going to do. The moment the meeting began, I could feel the tension thickening the air. The room was small, but it felt like an arena where the battle for justice was about to unfold. The prosecutor began by laying out the charges against Rebecca. The evidence was damning. We showed the security footage from the beach, the footage that captured her pulling out the gun and pointing it at my daughter, her cold, deliberate actions clear for all to see. We presented the phone records, revealing the calls she made that day, and the text messages she'd sent to her fellow HOA members, some of whom had been complicit in her discriminatory actions. But what hit hardest was the testimony from the beachgoers. One by one, they stood up and spoke about what they had witnessed that day, the Karen's anger, the cruelty in her words, and how she had intentionally targeted us. Their stories painted a vivid picture of a woman who was willing to go to any lengths to assert her power, even if it meant putting an innocent life in danger. The most powerful moment, though, came when Carol, the woman who had approached us with the information about Rebecca's history, took the stand. She had gathered even more proof about Rebecca's past actions, revealing how she had long been an advocate for discriminatory policies within the HOA. She had exposed the hidden truth about Rebecca's agenda, how she had been working for years to create an environment that excluded disabled individuals from public spaces. The revelations were chilling, and as Carol spoke, the room went silent. Rebecca's lawyer tried to dispute the evidence, to claim that it wasn't enough, that there was no real motive for Rebecca's actions, that it was just a misunderstanding. But it was too late. The truth was out in the open, and there was no denying it. The evidence was overwhelming. Rebecca's once confident demeanor started to crack. The smug smile faded from her face, replaced by the unmistakable look of a woman who knew she was about to lose everything. Her eyes darted around the room, as though she were looking for a way out, a way to escape the consequences of her actions. But there was no escape. It was time. The prosecutor turned to Rebecca, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the moment. "You thought you could get away with this, but the truth is now out, and you're going to pay for what you did. The evidence is irrefutable, and there's no way to deny your role in this. You targeted this family because of your own hatred, and because of that, a disabled child almost lost her life. And that's not something we can simply overlook." Rebecca opened her mouth, as if to speak, but no words came out. She looked at the prosecutor, then at me and my daughter, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes: fear. It was fleeting, but it was there. She had underestimated us. She had underestimated the strength of a mother fighting for her child's justice, the strength of a family determined to make sure that no one else would ever suffer the way we had. The prosecutor turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we request the maximum sentence for the defendant. She has not only committed an act of violence but has also shown a clear pattern of hate-driven behavior. We believe that her actions were premeditated and that she should be held accountable for the impact she has had on this community." The judge, after a long pause, nodded gravely. "Rebecca, you stand convicted of assault with a deadly weapon, as well as numerous charges related to your discriminatory actions. The sentence will be handed down after a brief recess, but let this be clear: there are consequences for the actions you've taken, and those consequences are not to be taken lightly." As the room emptied, I felt a rush of emotions flood through me. The fight wasn't over yet. There would be appeals, more legal battles, and the difficult journey of my daughter's recovery. But in that moment, I knew one thing: we had won. We had exposed Rebecca for the monster she was, and justice had been served. It wasn't just a victory for my daughter, it was a victory for every person who had ever been made to feel less than because of their disability. The truth had come to light, and Rebecca's reign of hatred was over. The days after the trial felt like a blur. The legal battle had been grueling, but now that Rebecca was facing charges for her actions, the community was beginning to breathe a sigh of relief. There was a sense of justice in the air, but it wasn't just the victory in court that brought comfort, it was the sense of change that followed. My daughter was still recovering physically, but emotionally, we were both on a journey toward healing, and I knew that this was just the beginning of something bigger. Rebecca's conviction had sent shockwaves through the community, but the true impact was felt far beyond that. People were beginning to wake up to the reality of what had been happening under their noses for so long. The HOA, which had been complicit in Rebecca's actions, was under intense scrutiny, and the truth of their discriminatory behavior could no longer be ignored. For years, they had allowed her to push her agenda of exclusion, and now, the community was demanding accountability. I spent countless hours meeting with other residents who had been affected by the HOA's policies, some of whom had never felt comfortable speaking out until now. It was clear that Rebecca's actions were not an isolated incident, they were part of a broader pattern of discrimination. From inaccessible parking spaces to the lack of proper accommodations in public areas, the HOA had consistently failed to support disabled residents, and it was time for that to change. With the support of the residents, I led a campaign to bring attention to the HOA's failures. We held town hall meetings, gathered petitions, and shared our stories of how the HOA's exclusionary policies had affected families like mine. Slowly but surely, the community began to rally behind us. It wasn't easy. There were many who were still hesitant to challenge the HOA, still afraid of the consequences of speaking out. But with every voice that joined the cause, the message grew louder, and the pressure on the HOA intensified. They could no longer ignore the fact that they had enabled Rebecca and her hateful beliefs for far too long. In the end, the HOA was forced to address the systemic issues that had allowed Rebecca to operate with impunity. They implemented new policies that prioritized accessibility, inclusion, and respect for all residents, regardless of their disabilities. The changes were slow at first, but they were significant. Accessible parking spots were finally added where they were needed, and ramps were installed in public spaces. The community, once fractured by fear and exclusion, began to heal. My daughter, though still scarred by the attack, began to heal as well. It wasn't an easy process. There were days when the memories of that day would come rushing back, and I could see the fear in her eyes, but there were also days filled with laughter, strength, and resilience. She was determined not to let the actions of one cruel woman define her. Together, we worked on moving forward, on building a future where she could feel safe, loved, and accepted, without the shadow of Rebecca's hatred hanging over her. In the months that followed, we saw a shift in the way people treated us. The community rallied around us, and slowly, the fear and resentment that had once held so many people back began to fade. We weren't just victims of a senseless attack, we were survivors, and we had shown the world that standing up for what was right, even in the face of hatred and violence, could bring about change. The most powerful moment came during a community gathering, where I stood before a crowd of people who had once been silent, but who now stood united. "We've all suffered in silence for too long," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "But no more. We've taken a stand, and we've shown that hate has no place in our community. This is just the beginning. We're stronger together, and we won't let anyone tear us apart." The crowd erupted in applause, and in that moment, I knew that we had won, not just the legal battle, but the moral one. The community had been forced to confront its own biases, and in doing so, it had become a place where acceptance and inclusion were no longer optional, they were the standard. As for Rebecca, her conviction was just the beginning of her downfall. Her actions had sparked a movement, and her name became synonymous with hate, a cautionary tale of the consequences of unchecked prejudice. But in the wake of her actions, something beautiful had emerged, something that would last far longer than the court case, something that would ensure no one else would ever have to suffer in silence again. The community had found its voice, and it was stronger than ever. We had fought for justice, and together, we had created a new beginning, one where love and acceptance would always prevail. As I sit back and reflect on everything that has happened, the pain, the anger, the fear, I realize that this journey was not just about fighting for justice, it was about reclaiming our dignity. It was about showing the world that no one, not even a woman with power or privilege, could strip away the inherent worth of a human being. My daughter's strength through it all has been nothing short of incredible. The physical scars from that day will eventually fade, but the emotional strength she's developed, her unwavering belief in herself and the world around her, is something that will stay with her forever. In the face of unimaginable adversity, we learned a lot about who we are and what we're capable of. The pain of watching my daughter suffer at the hands of someone so cruel was unbearable. But through the darkness, we found the light. We realized that standing up for what's right isn't just about fighting the enemy in front of you, it's about fighting for the future, for a world where no one is treated as less than. The courage we showed in that courtroom, the determination to push forward when it felt like everything was stacked against us, was a testament to our love, our bond, and the power of standing together. This journey changed me in ways I never expected. It opened my eyes to the silent prejudices and biases that exist all around us. But more importantly, it reminded me that even in the face of hate, we have the ability to rise above it. Our fight was never just about us, it was about everyone who has been made to feel inferior, excluded, or unwanted. It was about proving that no matter what you look like, how you move, or who you are, you have the right to be seen, respected, and loved. This wasn't just a fight for justice, it was a fight for dignity. And we won. This victory wasn't just ours, it belonged to everyone who ever felt invisible. And now, we stand stronger than ever, ready to fight for what's right, no matter the odds. If this story has moved you, if you believe in justice for those who can't fight for themselves, then take action now. Like this video, comment your thoughts, and share it with your friends and family. Together, we can amplify this message and ensure that Karen's behavior is never tolerated again. Let's create a world where kindness and respect come first, where people like my daughter are treated with dignity and love. Your voice matters. It's time to stand up for what's right, to stand up for those who need us the most. Together, we can make a real difference. Share this video, and let's keep fighting for justice, fairness, and inclusion for everyone.